This is me, which you can see, in Everglades National Park on the Anhinga Trail, which is one of the best places in the park system to photograph wildlife, birds in particular. And this is first thing in the morning in the winter, which is, if you want to photograph birds, that's the time to be there. You had this great, soft, warm light for shooting. It was a fantastic morning, and you've got this boardwalk that goes over the swamp. There's a lot of fish there, so the birds congregate to eat the fish, and the alligators congregate to eat the fish and the birds. And it's really a great spot. But the really important thing that I want you to note about this photo is that I am wearing my B&H hat. Just as I did at Great Smoky Mountains National Park and in Acadia. This is me in Grand Teton wearing my B&H hat. And a couple other things I want to point out about this. So this is Grand Teton in the winter. Great space, great place for winter photography. So my tripod, which is 6 feet, is actually fully extended. And I wanted to see how far down I could push it. I did not hit the ground. So I'm standing on at least 6 feet of snow there. So those trees are actually tree tops. Another thing that I want to point out, because I'm not going to talk about it during the presentation, but it's an important thing. Around my waist, that's a hip pack. I know it's not fashionable, but it is my wilderness survival kit. And when you're in the national parks, especially if you're hiking anywhere, it's important to take this seriously. It's not dangerous. Incidents very rarely happen, but when they do, you might be surprised to know that incidents don't tend to happen to people who are on a 2-week backpacking trip. They tend to happen to people who are on a 2-hour hike and didn't bring anything with them because I'm only going to be gone for 2 hours, what do I need? So if I'm anywhere more than a quarter mile away from the car, I always put that on my, I always put that on and make sure I've got that with me so that if, God forbid, something did happen, I would be okay. And there's more about that in the book, and if you're serious about getting off into the wilderness, then it's just something good to know. Another thing, I mentioned I'm standing on 6 feet of snow here. I'm a big proponent of getting out into the park, getting off the road, getting away from the sites that everybody else is looking at, and finding something original to take a photo of. But plus, I like to work quietly, without being bumped into by kids and all that. I love kids, but not bumping into my tripod. And so in the summer, the spring, I'm hiking. In the winter, I've got the snowshoes on because it's a lot easier to walk on snow with snowshoes. It keeps you nice and stable, usually. This was not set up. I fell face forward because I wasn't using my poles and right down. Fortunately, my brother was with me because if you've ever snowshoed, you know if you fall and you don't have poles, you pretty much can't get up. So very quick bio. I don't want to talk too much about me because we don't have a lot of time. But I went to Sacred Heart University and I took one photography class. I was not a photo major. And that class was history of photography. One of our assignments was to find a photographer, any photographer, and study their work and write a paper about them. The only caveat was that it had to be an unknown photographer. I picked Ansel Adams. So as you can tell, I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't intend to make a career out of it. I started as a writer. I worked as an editor and a photographer in magazines for 10 years. I worked for 2 magazines. And I've been freelancing for another 11 since 2004. And this book is my most recent major project. It's a huge passion of mine. I loved writing it. I love that it's finally out. And I like getting to talk about it too. So there's all the information. The official publication date is August 1st, but I do have pre-release copies right here. If anybody's interested afterward, feel free to come see me. Somebody asked how much. The cover price is $27.95, but show price is $25 because I don't want to have to deal with singles. Yeah. So a few quick facts. There's 59 parks. The National Park Service has 400 something, I think it's up to 409 units now. So if you're counting national monuments and historic sites and national battlefields. But the branded national park, we've got 59 of them in 27 states, 2 territories. There's one in American Samoa, there's one in the Virgin Islands. The first park was Yellowstone in 1872, although the first land set aside for conservation was Yosemite, but Yellowstone beat it to being designated an actual park. The newest was Pinnacles National Park in California, which was just founded. Well, it was a national monument before, but it was founded as a national park just 2 years ago. And next, I mean, this is a fluid group. There aren't any lands that are on the cusp, apparently, but up in Maine, there's Katahdin Woods and Waters, which, when it was originally proposed, could have been the size of Yellowstone. And that's, somebody's trying to make a private donation. This land is privately owned right now, and they're trying to donate it to the park system. Colorado National Monument has a lot of support. And one that's been making news lately is Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho. There's a lot of local public support to making that a national park. And that's the key thing. If the locals want it and they can talk the politicians into it, and the local politicians talk the rest of their Congress people into it, and 2 decades later, you got a national park. So why do we care about this as photographers? Because the national park system has everything that we want as a nature photographers. I mean, almost anything that you could want to shoot is somewhere in the national parks. So this is in Grand Teton, which is great mountain scenery. Rocky Mountain National Park, of course. The parks in Alaska, Wrangell, St. Elias, Gates of the Arctic, Kings Canyon. There's a lot of great mountain scenery in the park system. Coastal scenery. This is Olympic National Park in Washington, which is one of my favorite parks to photograph. Acadia up in Maine, which is within a day's drive for any of us who live in New York. And Redwoods National Park, that might surprise you. They've got great coastline. Some of the best coastline in the park system on the West Coast is right in the Redwoods. There's deserts. This is Badlands. There's sand dunes and Great Sand Dunes National Park. The Petrified Forest National Park, Big Bend. These are all great desert landscapes. Wildlife. This is in the Everglades, which I mentioned before is a great birding area. Again, Rocky Mountain. Glacier National Park has all the wildlife you could be looking for in North America. And then we've got volcanic areas. This is in Yellowstone. There's also Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, which has been making the news lately because the lava's been rising. You can photograph active lava streams there. Lassen Volcanic National Park in California has some surreal landscapes around. They're not dormant volcanoes, but they haven't erupted in a while, and the landscape is just amazing. There's wildflowers, there's even historic and architectural opportunities. Really, anything you want, you're going to find it somewhere in these 59 national parks. So one of the keys we want to talk about is how do you do your best photography? And that's what I want to focus on today, is how to approach a national park shoot in a way that allows you to do your best photos. Because that's what we're after, right? I know, all of us know we're not going to shoot a portfolio quality image every time we take our camera out of the bag. But if the possibility of that is not at least in the back of your head, then why are we out there, right? I mean, every time out, you're looking to meet or exceed your best work. And there's 2 things when it comes to national parks that I preach in the pursuit of this. One is time. You want to spend time there. When I was in my early 20s, I did a lot of road trips with a friend, and we would stop. This is absolutely serious. We stopped at Yellowstone for 6 hours. We spent, I said the Everglades, we were there for an afternoon. And I can give you 6 other examples. To spend, to not know about a place and walk into it for 6 hours, if you're going to come out with a good photo, it's almost accidental. So spend some time there. And then the other thing is to research. Know about the places that you're going. If you saw Art Wolf's presentation yesterday, he talked about that. He said he never goes anywhere without doing research before. And I agree wholeheartedly. It can be a lot of fun to just jump into a new place and see what's there. And that's great. And if you like to work that way, there's nothing wrong with it. But for me, I like to know what I'm getting into. It saves time and it provides structure to the trip. And that doesn't mean I can't take advantage of a serendipitous moment. And I'll give you an example later of when I did. But do the research, know where you're going, and know something about the location. So as far as time, this is a good example of an instance where spending time in the park helped me. And it helps in different ways. It gives you an opportunity to really explore, to find the best light, and to know and say, well, this is a great location, but the light's bad. I really need to photograph this in overcast conditions. And you can wait 2 or 3 days and wait for those conditions to happen and go back. It gives you a chance to, to make mistakes, to mess up, to try something, and it didn't work out. No big deal. I'll come back tomorrow and try again. And it gives you a chance to try some new techniques. Now, this is an instance where this is in Yellowstone at Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, right near the waterfalls. And I was actually there, originally I was there in the afternoon to scout out some waterfall locations. And I saw this rock formation in the canyon, and I noticed there was an osprey nest on top of it, and it was active. I could see the young birds in there. But the light wasn't good, because you see this canyon wall in the background? That was also lit. Everything was being front lit, and it all blended in together, and it would have been a mess of a photo. You wouldn't have known what you were looking at. But I could look at it and tell by the orientation of the canyon that if I came in the morning, then that canyon wall would be in shadow, which would help the top of this spire really pop in the photo. So I went back the next morning or 2 mornings later, and I set up and I just waited for a bird. This is in Congaree National Park. I just photographed this 2 weeks ago, and this is, I put this here as an example for things going wrong. I had a whole shoot. It had been a few years since I'd been in a park for the first time, and I was very excited about getting to do some work in Congaree. It's in South Carolina. And I got there and it flooded. And this is a normal thing there because it's a floodplain forest. It happens about 10 times a year, and it just happened to happen when I showed up. I spent 2 days there. There was only 1 mile of trail in the whole park that was above water. It was still pretty, but the light wasn't good. It was, we had bright sunny days with no clouds. And if you want to photograph in the forest, you want to photograph under overcast conditions. So after 2 days, I left. It looked like conditions weren't going to get any better, and I knew that the Blue Ridge Parkway was just a couple hours away, and it was springtime. And a couple hours in a slightly different direction was Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I talked to some other people that said that the dogwoods were great right then, so I left. And that's an extreme example of having a plan B, but it makes the point. This is in Grand Teton, and it's a focus stacked image because there's so much depth of field would have been required to do this, that to do it in one photo acceptably sharp wouldn't have worked. And at the time I made this, I hadn't really done much with focus stacking. I understood the concept, but hadn't had a need for it. Here I was able to play with it. I found the photo, I liked the idea, I did the different focal the different focal points, and then pieced it together back home. Now my point is, it's not, there's nothing earth-shattering about what I did, but because I had time, that was the middle of a 10-day trip, I didn't feel pressure to be somewhere else where I could be doing something that would have been faster. I didn't feel like, oh, I've got to get this sunset somewhere, I've got to shoot this other thing because I'm leaving tomorrow. I had 10 days in the park, so I felt relaxed enough that I could take an hour to just play around. So here's an example from Yellowstone. I went for a 10-day trip in 2010, and I had this idea, actually, I'll get to that later. So I had this idea to silhouette a geyser eruption in front of the sunset or sunrise sky. And I did some research. So part of this anecdote is time and part is research to see which geyser would work, because not all of them were photogenic. In fact, a lot of them were just a hole in the ground. I wanted something with some kind of aesthetic value to it, and I liked this mound. This is White Dome geyser, by the way. I also wanted one that was going to erupt fairly frequently, because if it only erupted every 6 months, well, that's a bad target for me on a 10-day trip. And I wanted one that erupted relatively predictably. Some of them, they'll make a prediction and it'll be, 18 to 36 hours. So, well, all right, that doesn't help me much if I'm trying to time it with a sunset. And this, after I researched a lot of them, I found this was my sweet spot. So this is White Dome Geyser. I like the mound. I think it's got a nice aesthetic value to it. And it erupts about every half an hour. And it's pretty predictable. It doesn't miss eruptions very often. So it took me 4 times in that spot to finally get a photo I was happy with. And I'll show you. So this was the first time there. And this wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but I liked the backlit steam. This was my second time there. The first time the eruption didn't happen at the right time. The second time, we had great sun, and then at the last minute, these clouds rolled in. And the eruption was on time, but I didn't like the light. This is not what I envisioned. Finally, on the 4th time, I had a decent sunset sky, and I had the eruption at the same time. I wasn't crazy about the eruption. It was kind of weak. It was thin. It didn't go as high as usual, but I got the shot. And then here's where serendipity kind of comes in. I did this after, and I was much happier with this. This is actually my favorite photo from the 4 days of trying to achieve that vision that I'd had beforehand. I should have said this story before I turn the slide. Another thing about White Dome Geyser is it's only a couple hundred yards away from Great Fountain Geyser, which is one of the prettiest in the park. Now the problem with it, the reason I wasn't targeting it was because it's one of these ones like 18 to 36 hours. You don't know when it's going to erupt. But it is beautiful. In fact, if you were watching Michael Melford right now instead of me, he's got the best photo I've ever seen of this geyser. And just Google it. Google Great Fountain Geyser and Michael Melford. It's a beautiful shot. So I was standing ready. I had my tripod set up. It's sunset. I'm aimed at White Dome Geyser. And I'm just standing waiting for something to happen, hoping it's going to erupt at the right time. And to this day, I don't know why I turned around, but I just went like this. And this is what I saw. This was erupting in this beautiful sunset light. And again, I'm planning my shoots, but there's always room for serendipity. I just turned the camera around, changed lenses, and was able to do this. Okay, so research. Just a few things about the tools that I use that I find helpful in researching a park beforehand. Google is your friend. Every day, 3.5 billion searches are done on Google. And you gotta wonder, who were people asking these questions to before Google existed? And I remember, I was in my young 20s and starting to travel and do some shooting. I used to put together like a book of information. I'd photocopy magazine articles. I was working in a magazine at the time and had access to the LexisNexis database. And I would look up, Yellowstone National Park and print out some articles, and I'd get like 80 pages of stuff and bind it into a notebook that I'd bring with me. Today, every one of us has the knowledge of the world. It's right in our pocket. You can find whatever information you want. I always Google. If you're going to Death Valley, just Google it. Google information. Type in Death Valley photography tips, photo locations, photo secrets. Everybody's blogging about it, or there's articles, or there's so much information out there. Another thing that I do is I go to Google News and I create a news alert. So if I know I'm traveling to Congaree National Park in 2 months, I'll create a news alert in Google News. So every day or every week, whatever you set it, if that park shows up in the news anywhere in the country, you're going to get an alert about it. And you can find out what's going on in the park. You can find out if there's trail closures, if there's special events. All this information can be useful when you get there. Another great thing to do is go on Flickr and search the park, and you can see what people are photographing, just to get ideas. You're not necessarily going to go copy what other people are doing, but it gives you ideas of places to go and the subjects that you're going to find there. Google Earth is great too. So I did a couple screenshots. So this is at 6 o'clock today. This is what Denali National Park is going to look like. So right now, this is what Denali would look like if it was a cartoon. So Reflection Pond in the foreground. This is a very popular spot to photograph And you see this slider up in the top right? That adjusts the time of day. And as you adjust that, it will show you how the light changes. So at midnight, this is what it's going to look like. Midnight tonight, this is how the light will look. If we want to wait until 5 in the morning, we can shoot the Milky Way. Oh, yeah, this is all excellent information for scouting locations before you even get on site. Tomorrow, not so great, unless you're statistic and the exposures you're looking for. Google Earth, another thing you can do, this is a satellite image of Cades Cove in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And if you look kind of almost on the line of thirds, toward the right, there's a tiny little, I wish I had a pointer, but kind of right up in here, you can see from the satellite photo there's a pond just off the lower right corner. No trail goes there. It's just in the woods. But you can see here, if I was going to go shoot Cades Cove, I could go and I'd say, well, there's a pond here, and go and check it out. I found a great meadow in Shenandoah like this. And a couple years ago, I was looking at satellite images of Grand Teton and spotted this mountain lake that none of the trails go to, and I really want to get there someday. So it's just a way to find places that maybe other people haven't spotted yet. Another thing is internet forums. These are 4 websites where I find, well, 3 of them. People are very helpful. Other photographers are a great source of information. So just go on the forum and say, hey, I'm going to Yellowstone. Who shot there? Do you have any suggestions for me? Travelphotographers.net is an excellent place for this because part of their forum is broken down by region. And the people who frequent the forum tend to be the ones who live there, and they're very helpful with information. So if you were going to go photograph the Everglades, you could go into the southeast region of the forum, and at your fingertips, you've got live advice from people who live there, other photographers who know the kinds of things that would interest you. NationalParksTraveler.com is not a photography site, but something interesting they have, and they just started this last year, so it's not quite full yet, but it's a great idea, is they have a wiki for kind of secret spots in the parks. So they have a lot of hikers and kind of people go in and put spots they found, and that's a great resource too. The Photograph America newsletter. Has anybody seen this before? Yeah, this is a great resource too. This photographer in California, his name is Robert Hitchman. In 1989, he started putting together a quarterly newsletter based on his trips, and a lot of them have been to national parks, and they're excellent sources of information. Anytime, I would highly recommend, if you're going to go buy his whole catalog, it's great. But if you're going to go to a national park, see if he's written about it, because he's like-minded. He knows the kinds of things that we're looking for, and I've gotten some great information from him in the past. There's also books. Not every park has a photography book written about it, but a lot of the major ones do, and they can be very good. The best ones tend to be those written by photographers. I've seen a couple that were written by travel writers, and they're maybe not in our heads. But this is a good resource too. Like I said, all the national parks, like Acadia, I think there's 3 photography books about Acadia. There's also books about the national parks in general. This first one, Photographing National Parks, I hear is fantastic. It's a must for any photographer's library. In the interest of giving you real information and not plugging just my own stuff, Tim Fitzharris, who I forget which magazine he worked for, but he was an editor for one of the big photography magazines, and he wrote an excellent book. It doesn't cover all the parks. It covers, I think maybe like the 20 biggest ones, but he's got a lot of detailed location information in there. And this last one, I don't know how many people know who QT Luong is, but if you've seen the Ken Burns documentary in the national parks, this is the photographer who was interviewed as part of the documentary. He is, as far as anybody knows, the first photographer to photograph all 59 national parks with a large format camera. And I noticed on his website just a few weeks ago that he has a book on the national parks coming out next year to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the national park system. I'm very excited to see what he has to say, because he's very passionate. If you read his blog, he's very passionate about the places, not just the photography, but the nature and these wild landscapes. So that's a book I'm very excited to see. Once you're on site, talk to other photographers. 9 out of 10 of them are going to be perfectly happy to talk to you. You know, we all know the grumpy ones are around too. But, you know, especially if you could find somebody who's been there for a week already. I mean, they're shooting right then at the same time as you, and they've got a little very recent experience. Ask them, where have you been? Have you seen anything great? And I've found that people are often very helpful. And then towards the end of your trip, return the favor. Rangers, too. They are an enormous, untapped reservoir of information. They know these parks better than anybody. And this photo is from Taggart Lake in Grand Teton National Park, which never came up in any of the research that I did before going there for the first time. And I asked a ranger, I said, I'm just looking for a quiet place to photograph some morning reflections of the mountains. And she told me, go here. She said, oh, you know where I've been lately? And she gave me the directions. It's not even a long hike. It's not terribly out of the way, but for some reason, everything I read ignored it. They're there to help you. That's their job. And they will, and you can pretty much in any park find at least one ranger who also knows something about photography. And again, that's very helpful. So what am I doing with all this information? I'm making notes. My first day in the park, I hardly ever shoot, unless I just come across something that happens to be the right time. But I'm making notes, and I like to make my notes on a map. This one's a little sparse for me, but this one's at Acadia, and I'm marking the locations. Hey, I saw this, and it would be a great sunrise location. I'm just going to jot it down. There's a great birch grove. I want to photograph this on an overcast day. And I'm keeping all these notes. And again, I don't have to stick to my plan. I don't have to hit all these spots. But where this helps me is, hey, I woke up today and it's overcast. What am I going to shoot? I don't have to think about it. I've got a list of 5 places already, and I can just go and go work. So I had all the ideas. I knew what I wanted to shoot, and I circled all the locations so that the next morning I could get up, snow is on the ground, snow is falling, and I just did a clockwise loop around the park, shooting everything that I'd spent 4 days envisioning. And you can also see in the lower right, I made a note, high tide, 1:30, because when you're shooting on the coast, you want to know the tides, because they can change the look of a scene dramatically. Whew, close one. Here's one of the photos from that trip. This is at Jordan Pond in Acadia. Okay, I know it's 5:30. I'm going to try to go a little faster here. So another example, I was in the Everglades, and if you've ever shot there, you know it's not a place for landscape photography. It's just very flat, featureless. So I saw this tree that I liked, you know, and the light wasn't good, and I said, well, you know what, let me just write it down. Maybe I'll have a use for it later. I just liked the shape of it. 2 days later, there was a great sunset about to happen. Okay, I know where I'm going. I'd scouted it, I wrote it down. When the light was right, I already knew what to go do. The following night, I was out. I went out to shoot some star scenes, some night scenes, and the location I'd scouted ended up being a bust. It just didn't work out. And again, I thought, oh, you know what I could try? So I went back to this location that I had scouted ahead of time. It's tough to see with the lights, isn't it? Stars in a tree. Okay, who knows what these are? Circles. These are our tripod holes. So I don't know if you've heard this term. I love this term. So tripod holes, it's kind of derogatory. It's you know, a place that's been photographed so many times that there are holes in the ground where people keep putting their tripods to shoot it. And there's some photographers want to stay away from them. Say, hey, you know, it's been shot 1,000,000 times. I want to go shoot something new. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I like shooting these anyway. And there's 3 reasons why. One is business. So if you're selling images or you have any thoughts to sell images at some point, you know, whether it's prints or licensing, it's important to have these. If you're going to have anywhere in your marketing and your website or whatever that you were in Yellowstone National Park, then you're going to have a photo of bison. You're going to have a photo of the lower falls at Yellowstone, because I can guarantee you somebody's going to ask you for them at some point. missed. Oh, okay. So another point is that there's a reason that there are tripod holes there. It's a beautiful location. There's something to it that has captured the imagination of all the people who have been there before. So check it out. Also, I like the challenge. I'd like to go to a spot that 1 million people have already photographed and see if there's something I can find to, I don't know, bring out my own style or some way to photograph it that other people haven't done. I love to buck conventional wisdom too. And here's an example. So this is in Bryce Canyon National Park. And this is the view from Sunrise Point, which every photographer who's gone there has made this photograph. But how can you not, just for philosophical reasons, go here and make a photograph? It's a beautiful spot. And I can tell you, I've sold this. 1 million other people have it. It doesn't matter. There was still a market for it. And this is the view of Lower Falls that I mentioned in Yellowstone. And this is from Artist Point. And you can see why it's called Artist Point. I mean, you couldn't build a waterfall any better than this. The conventional wisdom, you'll see it in every book written about photographing the park, is you want to go in the morning because the morning sun can go into the mist and create a rainbow. It happens at about 10:30 in the summertime. So I shot it. It was great. But I said, oh, I want to buck the conventional wisdom too. What happens if I come back in late afternoon? I loved this. I wasn't the only person there, but I was the only photographer with a tripod because that's not when you shoot this. Why? I don't know. I mean, the light's kind of coming over the trees and hitting the top of the falls. It's bouncing off the canyon wall and creating this glow. I loved this, and this turned out to be my favorite photo from the scene. Another thing is that these places change. So just because it's a popular photography location doesn't mean it's always going to look the same. And this is the best example I can think of. This is one of Ansel Adams' most famous photos. This is from the Snake River Overlook in Grand Teton National Park. You couldn't do this photo now. Ansel Adams couldn't do this photo now because now it looks like this. All those trees grew up and you don't get that S-curve of the river anymore. This is also in Yellowstone. This is at Mammoth Hot Springs. And I shot this in 2010. You know, all this microbial life, all these colors. You could spend days there just shooting. I was shooting the patterns in the microbial life in the springs. All this great color. The light's good pretty much any time of day for doing something. 2 years later, looked like this. So the places change. They can change for the better, they can change for the worse, but they're going to change. So there's always an opportunity to do something different, even if 1 million photographers have been there before you. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Cades Cove, where I had the satellite photo before, one of my favorite spots in this park to shoot. I shot this in 2003. The tree's dead now. I shot this in 2003. Again, this tree's dead now. I shot this in, I'm sorry, that last one was 2003. This is in 2013. That tree on the left is gone now. I was there 2 weeks ago. That tree's gone. So there's 2 takeaways from this. One, if you're a tree in Smoky Mountains National Park, you don't want me to photograph you. 2, the place has changed. So even if it's been shot before, try it. Find something new there. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about ancillary gear. I'm not going to get into cameras and all that. You shoot with what you shoot with, and you have your reasons. I'm not going to try to talk you into shooting my stuff. But there are some things that make your life easier. First is a tripod, primarily because Manfrotto sponsored me. I do use Gitzo, which is the same company. Shoot with a tripod. My philosophy is any photo worth shooting is worth the time to use a tripod for. If I find myself really tempted to let's just do it quickly, that tells me the idea wasn't that great. Filters, the digital age, really the only ones we need are the polarizer and the neutral density. The polarizer for me is mandatory. I use it more often than not. You know, now I shoot with the D3S. I told you I wasn't going to talk about gear. I lied. So I shoot with the D3S, and I can get almost a day out of my battery. That's it. So if I'm spending 10 days in a park, I need to recharge. So I keep an inverter in the car. That way, if I'm driving to a location, anytime I'm driving, I can have things plugged in, my laptop, the camera batteries, also the batteries for my Geo Tracker. I find I love being able to know where I shot something. In the film days, I was terrible about taking notes. I would spend days after a trip researching, trying to figure out the name of that mountain I shot, trying to remember where I was when I made this photo. With geo-tracking, I always know exactly where I was. I can plug the coordinates into Google Earth and find the names of the mountains and the rivers that I photographed, and I don't have to take any notes, which is good because I'm bad at it. This is a Yes Watch. It's I have one of these. It's great. It gives the sunrise and sunset times, the moon phase, all sorts of useful information. You can also use it as a compass. Silicone jar opener. Excellent for getting a stuck filter off a lens. Takes up no space in the bag. I've got like 3 of them. A few apps that I use. The Photo Amorous, Photographer's Amorous. This will tell you, you can see those lines. What those are telling me are, it's telling me the time of the sunrise and sunset, the moonrise and the moonset, and those lines indicate where they're going to be. So you can just open it up. You'd have it on your phone or an iPad, on a tablet, whatever, and you can scout a location easier. So I forget where I pinpointed this, but you know, you could see if you're wondering, is the sun going to set over this mountain? You can see right on the GPS, right on the map on your phone, yes it is, no it isn't. And the moon's going to come up here later. It's excellent for scouting. Another similar one is photo pills, which is sort of the reverse concept. With photo pills, if maybe I've got an idea if I want to shoot, I'll use the example here, the sun setting through an arch. Photo pills will help you find out what time of the year that's going to happen. And it's the same thing. You plot yourself on the map, and it will help you determine when the sun's going to be where you want. It also does the same for the moon and the Milky Way. I'm terrible with the stars. Aside from the Big Dipper, I don't know what I'm looking at. But in a photo, I might want to know. If I'm doing a star photo, I might want to know that Mars is in it, or a constellation, or the North Star. And with the Skyview app, and there's 20 other ones just like it, I can just hold my iPad up to the sky, and it shows. So it would show this constellation. Jupiter up there was in the scene. This is a real capture from the Everglades. Tide graph. Like I mentioned before, the tides make a huge difference in how a scene looks on the coast. Another good reason to know the tides it's just for safety. Olympic National Park, you go around these headlands and you can get trapped by the tide. There are people who have drowned because they got trapped. Or you just might not be able to get back to where you started from until the tide goes out again. So it's important information for photography and in some places for safety as well. So I'm going to talk just about a few of the national parks. I have a few photos to show. I've photographed about half of them, but if you're paying close attention, if you were counting, a lot of these photos were from 6 parks, because those are the ones that I keep going back to over and over. I love going to a new place, but as a photographer, there's a lot of value to knowing a place well. So there's kind of what I call my big 6 of the places. I didn't plan it this way. These are the ones that I keep going back to. We'll start with 2 that are within a day's drive of New York. Acadia National Park, great coastal park. It's like a photographer's playground up there, especially in the fall. Excellent fall foliage up there. And these beautiful coastal scenes that are great for photographing in the morning. This is in Monument Cove, as is this, which is a popular place to shoot if you look in those the photography guidebooks that I mentioned for Acadia. They probably all mention Monument Cove. I liked this photo. I hadn't seen anybody else shoot it this way, so I was really happy. I mean, it's probably like the 10th time I was here. But to come away with something that maybe somebody else has done this, but the point is I didn't see somebody else do it, which gave me the idea to go try to do something like it. I loved the green on the rocks, and this gentleman was asking me, still here? Yeah, but this is the photo you asked about before, right? So I used a polarizer to help take some of the shine off the rocks, and this is at low tide. I had this great fog in the background. Another thing in Acadia is the Rockefeller, who lived in the area 100 years ago, built these carriage roads that go through the park. One of the things I like about Acadia is it's so easy to get around because you've got these packed gravel carriage roads. You can bike on them, you can ride a horse, although I don't know too many horse riding photographers. But you can, there have been times when, you know, I knew I wanted to photograph someplace off in the woods that would have taken me an hour to hike to. And don't get me wrong, I love to hike, but if I'm trying to catch sunset an hour and a half from now, well, it could be really convenient to hop on my bike and be there in 7 minutes. And the other great thing about the carriage roads is there's these bridges. I forget how many there are. I want to say 27, but I'm not positive. 26? So close. I wrote a book about this. It's in the book. Is that where you found it? Okay. So, and they're beautiful. Every one of them is a unique design. And you get off into the woods. In fact, I'm pretty sure I biked here. And the bridges make a fantastic subject. The carriage roads make a great subject. And just the places that the carriage roads can get you to quickly and safely, which is interesting. Another I said the word safely. Another thing I like about Acadia, no grizzly bears. You can hike and feel relatively certain nothing's going to attack you. There's both aspens and birches, a lot of birch groves in Acadia. And one of the few lighthouses in the park system is also there. Bass Head Harbor Light is at the southern tip of the west side of the island. So this is Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you know, kind of the typical photo from there. And again, you could say 1 million people shot it, but when you see it in person, you're going to take your camera out too. It also has the highest concentration of black bears in the United States. I think there's 1 per acre, if I remember that correctly. So you spend a couple days in the Smokies and you're going to see some bears. Dogwood blossoming. This is actually a couple years ago. This wasn't this spring. There's a lot of waterfalls in the Smokies. This one is Grotto Falls, which is an area of the park that's not visited often. Well, I don't want to say often, not as often as other parts of the park. This is about an hour hike into the woods, and the thing I like about it is the trail goes right under the falls. So you can get under there and get a photo like this. It's also a great waterfall to shoot from outside too. There's a photo of it in the book. This is in Cades Cove. I feel sorry for this tree. It's still alive now, but we'll see what happens. Great Smoky Mountains. Another thing is, you know, these pockets of wilderness they're not isolated among civilization. There's other great areas around them. The Great Smoky Mountains in Shenandoah are connected by the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is, you think it's a road, it's a great photography destination. When I drive the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's hard for me to get anywhere because I just want to keep stopping. And another one of my favorite things about the Blue Ridge Parkway, 469 miles, no traffic lights. Just drive. This is one of the spots in the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's Mabry Mill, which they call the most photographed site in the Blue Ridge Parkway. I still wanted to photograph it. It's beautiful. But I had it in mind too, the tripod holes thing. So I was looking for something original I could do too, and I came up with this, just to get off to the side and do a close-up with the water coming down. And this is Shenandoah National Park, which is at the other tip of the Blue Ridge Parkway. This is in the Big Meadows area, which is just such a great place to shoot. I've actually shot at Shenandoah a few times now. I might end up having a Big 7 instead of a Big 6. But that's another one. It's a 5-hour drive from New York. This is also Shenandoah. A lot of waterfalls in Shenandoah, but you gotta hike to get to them because the main road is along the ridge line. So any hike you do to get to a waterfall is down the mountain, and then you gotta hike back up to get back out. Everglades, like I said, great birding park. You especially want to go in March and April. The birds just, because as the wet season ends, the water recedes and all the birds are congregating into these pools that are smaller and smaller and smaller. And they're eating, so they don't care that you're there. Of course, the alligators. How much time do I have? This is a great story. The morning I shot this, you know, a cool thing about being a photographer is you're there before anybody else. You get that hour or two of quiet. Well, finally, a couple people were showing up, and this guy, he lived locally, and he says he goes there almost every morning for a walk. And he was telling me right in the spot where I was photographing this, he said a couple years before that, there was a, and just, this is on a boardwalk, so I'm at the end of a boardwalk. He said he was there, and a photographer had a really nice camera, a very nice wide-angle lens, and he was leaning through the railings and photographing these alligators that were right there sunning. And, they're just sitting there not doing anything. And he's shooting, he's getting closer, and all of a sudden, bam! One alligator comes up and almost gets him. He, jumped back, and just rest easy, the lens was okay. It's what we all cared. You were all thinking it, right? Again, the Everglades, not a great landscape park, but this morning, and here's another serendipity story. I was actually going to the Anhinga Trail to photograph birds in the morning light, and there was this great fog in the middle of the park, so I waited for the sunrise there instead, because I knew it's not common to run across this opportunity there. Olympic National Park, not in driving distance in New York. This is in, it's like the opposite of Acadia. It's in the northwest corner up in Washington. Such a beautiful spot because it's got 3 different environments in one park, and all of them come packaged with the best light to do that kind of photography. So the coast, you get these great sunsets, and you get fog that rolls in pretty often at the end of the day. The tide pools are some of the, the best in the park system. Rainforest in Olympic National Park. Everything's green. I mean, you walk around, especially the whole rainforest, it's just green, 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 green. You need a raincoat, tripod, polarizing filter, and point your camera somewhere and shoot. This also has mountain scenery in Olympic National Park, and the deer are kind of locally famous for being very friendly. To get this photo, I just sat in one spot for about 15 minutes, and he got curious about me and just walked right, I had lined up the mountains, and he just was walking right toward me. I mean, it was like, it was like getting an animal model. I guess this is still in Olympic National Park. Grand Teton. You know how sometimes if you're walking with your camera and it's maybe on your shoulder and it kind of bounces and hits the shutter and you get just some random picture? If you do that in Grand Teton, that picture goes in your portfolio. It's just beautiful everywhere you look, and there's all, there's rivers and mountains, rivers and lakes and ponds to shoot the reflections in. This is, my brother had actually spotted this. We were driving somewhere else, and he said, oh, the sun's going to set behind the mountain. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I liked the idea of photographing in the shadow instead of getting the sun in the frame. There's Grand Teton, there's kind of a lot else going on. There's some privately owned areas, a lot of horseback riding. So this for me was kind of a kind of telling a story of the place. So these are some of the local horses with the mountains in the background. And here, tripod holes. This is on Moore Monroe, these old barns in Grand Teton. You will never find yourself alone with the camera there, no matter how early you go. The only time I was alone was when I snowshoed a mile to get there. I was the only one crazy enough to do that, at least that day. And this is remember I showed you the tripod sunk in. This is from that same day. Yellowstone National Park. For me, Yellowstone is kind of like the pinnacle for photography. It doesn't have the best landscapes, but it has good landscapes. It doesn't have the best wildlife, but there's a lot there. And it does have the best geothermal features in the world, arguably. The geysers and the hot springs and the steam, waterfalls, wildflowers. If you want to shoot it, it's probably in Yellowstone. And the thing that always strikes me when I go there is I am never bored. There's, even if I get sick of shooting geysers, I can go do wildlife tomorrow or landscapes. There's constantly something else to do. These are some snags off the side of one of the hot springs. Bison. Funny thing is, I don't remember shooting this. I could tell you 99% of my photos, I could tell you everything about how I shot them. I don't remember this. This is in the Lamar Valley in the winter, which was minus 20 degrees. It was pretty intense, but so worth it. And this is, I mentioned before, a great fountain geyser. One of the nice things about it is even if it's not erupting, there's this shallow pool of water. It's got to be about 100 feet wide, and you can do some really nice work. So I was there to shoot something else, but I saw the steam was going to go in front of the sun and photograph this instead. So one final thought I want to leave you with. Remember I said Taggart Lake before, where I shot the reflection of the Grand Tetons. This is the trail to it. Just get away from the road. Like I said, when we go out, we want to do our best work. We want to look for unique opportunities. We don't want to be shooting the same thing that the person next to us is shooting with their phone. And you're not going to find those opportunities at the overlooks. Get out into the wilderness, hike, spend some time there.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.